A hyper-realistic cinematic close-up of Marcus, a mid-30s black man with medium-dark skin, short natural hair, a clean-shaven face, and a neatly pressed waiter uniform consisting of a white button-up shirt, black vest, name tag MARCUS, black trousers, and worn black shoes. He stands alone outside a high-end lakeside resort at the break of dawn. Soft mist rises from the water behind him, catching the early morning light. His expression is tense, eyes slightly widened as he senses something is wrong. The faint, distant sound of helicopter blades vibrates through the quiet air, barely visible in the background, adding an unnerving undertone to the peaceful scene. He didn't expect anyone to listen to him that day. He rarely did. It was a truth he had learned over years of blending into the background, serving quietly, existing in the corners of luxury spaces where people like him were seen, but never truly acknowledged. And yet on that morning, something in his chest tugged harder than usual, an instinct he didn't fully understand, a warning he felt before he could explain it. It started as a whisper, soft and unsettling, rising beneath the layers of routine he clung to. He tried to shake it off, tried to convince himself he was imagining it, but deep down, he knew he wasn't. Something was coming, something terrible, and the world around him moved with a careless confidence that only made the silence louder. A wide establishing shot of Marcus walking briskly toward the resort terrace in his crisp waiter uniform. He carries a silver tray with practiced balance. The early morning sunlight stretches long golden shadows across polished stone flooring, creating a serene yet cinematic atmosphere. The resort's towering glass walls reflect the warm orange glow of sunrise, hinting at wealth and tranquility. Marcus's posture is upright but tense, his eyes drifting instinctively toward the helipad in the distance. Though the setting is calm, subtle cues in his face reveal something is already unsettling him, building suspense as he moves closer to the source of his unease. The sound reached him first. The uneven rhythm of rotor blades cutting through the air, not with the steady pulse he was used to hearing, but with a strange, stumbling beat that felt wrong. He froze for a moment as the noise washed over him, his breath catching without warning. He could sense danger before anyone else even bothered to look up, but sensing danger was one thing, being believed was another. A cinematic over-the-shoulder shot of Marcus as he comes to an abrupt stop, his shoulders tense. Ahead of him, the terrace is quiet, tables neatly arranged, but his attention is fixed beyond the frame toward the unseen helicopter. His expression tightens, eyebrows narrowing with instinctive fear. The lighting emphasizes the early morning calm, while a subtle motion blur accentuates the suddenness of his stop. His hand grips the tray a bit too tightly, and the distant, irregular thumping of rotor blades fills the atmosphere with foreboding. This single moment visually captures Marcus's first true recognition that something is terribly off. That day had begun like any other, the kind of quiet morning he had repeated hundreds of times before without thinking. Marcus arrived long before the first guest wandered into the dining hall, stepping through the staff entrance as the early sky shifted from darkness into pale color. He always came early. It was a habit he had carried from childhood, shaped by the lessons of people who had lived entire lives fighting to be taken seriously. If he couldn't control the way people perceived him, he could at least control the way he carried himself. He moved with purpose, checked every station, straightened every chair, polished every glass. These small acts grounded him. They gave him structure in a world that rarely offered him any. A dramatic low-angle cinematic shot of Daniel Harrow, a white male in his early 50s with gray slick-back hair and a slightly heavy build, stepping out of the resort entrance. He wears an immaculate, expensive navy suit and polished designer shoes. His posture exudes power and absolute confidence. Behind him are laughing executives, their expressions carefree and wealthy, contrasting sharply with Marcus's tension. The lighting highlights Daniel as if the world itself is spotlighting him, reinforcing his status and authority. This moment visually introduces the hierarchy between them, one man unquestioned, the other unheard, even before their paths cross. The resort itself seemed to glow in the morning light. Marble floors, towering glass windows, manicured gardens stretching toward the lake. It was the kind of place built for those who believed life owed them beauty. Guests floated through its halls with the confidence of people who had never feared being doubted or dismissed. They belonged there. Everyone knew it, especially Marcus, but belonging wasn't something he expected anymore. He focused on doing his job well, on keeping his smile polite, on treating each task with dignity even if no one thanked him for it. Invisible pride was still pride. A tight, emotional close-up shot of Marcus's eyes as he watches the executives, particularly Daniel Harrow, move through the terrace area. His gaze is filled with worry, the corners of his eyes slightly strained. The background is softly blurred with bokeh-like depth, capturing the executive's laughter and carefree body language without drawing focus away from Marcus. His face is half lit by morning sun, half shadowed, emphasizing the internal conflict. He sees danger approaching, while those around him exist in effortless comfort. The visual contrast symbolically reinforces how differently the world treats him compared to those in power. That morning, however, the atmosphere was different. There was a current of excitement tinged with nervous energy, as if the entire building were bracing for something important. A corporate retreat had filled the resort with executives, investors, and high-ranking professionals who spoke loudly, laughed easily, and walked as though they owned the sky above them. They moved in clusters, discussing profits, strategies, partnerships. Their presence shifted the air in ways Marcus had grown familiar with, ways that reminded him of where he stood in the unspoken hierarchy. A symbolic, emotionally charged medium shot, focusing on Marcus's hand, gripping the edge of the silver tray with visible tension, knuckles whitening, fingers curled with strain. Behind him, blurred but recognizable, the silhouette of the helicopter sits on the helipad, rotor blades idling unevenly. The soft sunrise glow contrasts with Marcus's tension, visually capturing the invisible pressure he feels. The framing emphasizes that Marcus senses a threat looming behind him, while everyone else remains blind to it. The symbolism of the tight grip reflects both fear and responsibility, setting the stage for the racial injustice that will soon unfold. The CEO at the center of it all, Daniel Harrow, carried himself with an almost theatrical self-assurance. He wore wealth like a second skin. Everything about him, from the crispness of his tailored suit to the effortless authority in his stride, declared that he was a man used to getting his way. People parted for him automatically, eager to earn his approval or avoid his irritation. He was the kind of man who believed the world bent to accommodate him, and most of the time, it did. A surreal cinematic shot of the resort's tall glass wall, reflecting distorted streaks of spinning rotor, lights from the helicopter. Marcus stands in the foreground, staring toward the glass with a tense, worried expression. The warped reflection gives the sense of impending danger, like a visual omen. His waiter uniform is immaculate but slightly rustled by the morning wind. The calm elegance of the resort contrasts with the distorted imagery of mechanical distress, creating an unsettling mood. This visual metaphor reinforces Marcus's intuition. Something dangerous is unfolding, though no one else seems to notice. As Marcus prepared the breakfast service, he noticed the staff exchanging quick glances, whispering in hushed tones whenever supervisors weren't looking. The helipad crew had arrived earlier than usual. One of the groundskeepers muttered something about a maintenance oversight. Another mentioned that the helicopter scheduled for midday pickup had arrived too soon, landing with a shudder that rippled across the platform. Marcus heard bits of their conversation as he passed by with trays, but he didn't linger. He stayed focused, reminding himself that rumors were a luxury he didn't have time for. Still, the unease settled into his chest like a small weight he couldn't shake off. A dramatic aerial drone-style shot of the resort helipad from above. The helicopter sits in the center, rotor blades spinning unevenly, creating a jagged spiral pattern. Tiny sparks flicker beneath the engine compartment, almost imperceptible, yet ominous. The surrounding resort architecture forms a polished contrast to the mechanical distress. Staff members appear small and unaware from above, emphasizing how invisible the danger remains to everyone except Marcus. The shot captures the vulnerability of the scene. A fragile machine preparing for disaster, while a luxurious world goes about its business. Later, when he stepped onto the terrace to collect empty dishes, he heard it again, the helicopter's struggling engine. It was a strange, uneven sound, almost like a heartbeat skipping its rhythm. He paused mid-step, eyes narrowing as he listened more closely. The machine was still grounded, but something about the way it idled struck him as deeply wrong. It reminded him of the helicopters he heard growing up near a military base, machines that were strong, steady, predictable. This one wasn't. Its vibrations seemed strained, faltering, fighting against something invisible. A powerful emotional portrait of Marcus standing on the terrace, staring toward the helipad with deep concern etched across his face. The wind gently lifts the edges of his black waiter apron, adding motion and tension to the image. His uniform is neat, but his composure is visibly strained. The morning light reflects off his eyes as he focuses intensely on the helicopter. His face shows fear, responsibility, and isolation all at once. The helipad lies blurred in the background, hinting at the looming danger he alone recognizes. This shot captures the emotional weight of a man whose warning will be ignored. He stood there for a moment longer, tray in hand, frozen between routine and instinct. He didn't want to overthink it. He didn't want to make assumptions. He didn't want to be wrong. And yet the feeling grew stronger, rising from his stomach into his chest like a warning he couldn't ignore. Something inside that aircraft was failing. He could feel it. A slow-shutter cinematic image showing Daniel Harrow in sharp focus, mid-laugh, his expensive suit catching the sunlight and emphasizing his power and arrogance. Behind him, slightly blurred due to the slow-shutter technique, stands Marcus, terrified, eyes wide, posture stiff. The blurred motion deepens the emotional contrast. Daniel's carefree wealth versus Marcus's rising dread. The scene feels surreal, emphasizing how vastly different their realities are at the same moment. The background captures polished resort stone and glass, completing the image of a world that protects privilege while ignoring warning signs from those it devalues. He tried to push the thought away as he returned to the dining room, but it followed him, tightening with each passing minute. His hands moved through the motions of clearing tables, but his mind kept drifting back to that strange mechanical stutter. Every time the wind shifted, carrying the sound in his direction, it triggered that same uneasy jolt. He kept glancing through the windows toward the helipad, waiting to see someone react, someone investigate, someone acknowledge the danger he sensed so clearly, but no one did. A cinematic early morning interior shot of the resort dining hall, filled with warm golden sunlight filtering through tall glass windows. Marcus, a mid-30s black man in a crisp waiter uniform, white button-up, black vest, black trousers, apron, name tag MARCUS, meticulously wipes down polished tables. His movements are careful, disciplined, and practiced, reflecting years of unnoticed labor. Chairs are perfectly aligned, silverware neatly placed, and the room is empty and silent except for the soft hum of distant machinery. The light catches dust particles in the air, adding a serene beauty that contrasts with Marcus's underlying tension. He works alone, unseen, embodying the quiet dignity of someone who takes pride in every detail. The resort continued its routine. Guests lingered over breakfast. Executives reviewed their notes. Supervisors rushed to prepare for the CEO's departure. No one heard the helicopter the way Marcus did. No one felt the wrongness vibrating in its core, and even if he tried to tell them, would they listen? A realistic cinematic shot of Marcus walking through the narrow staff entrance corridor, carrying a bundle of polished cutlery wrapped in a clean white cloth. The hallway is utilitarian, gray walls, supply shelves, fluorescent lighting, but Marcus walks with purpose and discipline. His uniform is neatly pressed, his posture upright, and his expression focused. The contrast between the luxury guests enjoy and the modest behind-the-scenes space he occupies reinforces the divide he straddles daily. Despite the simplicity of the environment, Marcus moves with pride, determination, and quiet strength, embodying the unseen backbone of the resort's operation. He knew the answer. A wide-angle cinematic shot capturing Marcus in the dining hall placing cutlery, adjusting chairs, and aligning table settings with precision. The room around him is expansive and luxurious, polished marble floors, crystal chandeliers, panoramic lakeview windows. Marcus appears small within the grandeur, yet every movement he makes shapes the space into perfection. His waiter uniform is clean and fitted, his face calm but reflective, suggesting a man who takes pride in craft even when unrecognized. The lighting emphasizes order and symmetry, visually highlighting the meticulous care that Marcus brings to a world that rarely acknowledges him. People like him had learned to swallow their instincts. They learned that speaking up came with risks, being labeled dramatic, troublesome, paranoid. They learned that their concerns were often brushed aside, overshadowed by the comfort of those who believed themselves invincible. He had lived enough moments like that to know how quickly his voice could be dismissed. A soft, dreamlike flashback image of young Marcus, around 8 years old, medium dark skin, short hair, standing alone near a chain-link fence that surrounds a military base. Several helicopters fly overhead, their steady, rhythmic blades beating confidently through the sky. The setting sun casts warm light across the scene, illuminating the child's face with awe and curiosity. The image symbolizes the origin of Marcus's instinctive understanding of helicopter sounds. Despite the innocence of the moment, there is emotional depth, the contrast between young Marcus's fascination and the future moment where his knowledge will be ignored. But ignoring danger was far worse. That truth tugged at him until his chest tightened with something close to panic. A detailed close-up of Marcus's hands as he places pristine glassware onto a table with careful precision. In the blurred background, executives walk by without noticing him, men in tailored suits, women in elegant attire, immersed in their own conversations. Marcus's expression is calm but distant, revealing the emotional weight of being invisible in spaces he contributes to. The sunlight reflects off the glass, creating a symbolic shimmer that contrasts with the indifference around him. His uniform remains clean and professional, underscoring his commitment despite being overlooked. As the day rushed forward, the CEO and his entourage made their way toward the helipad, moving with the ease of people certain nothing could touch them. Their laughter carried across the terrace, bouncing off the walls with carefree arrogance. Marcus felt each step they took like a countdown ticking inside his mind. He wiped his hands nervously on his apron, torn between caution and responsibility. A medium shot of Marcus standing beside a tall window, the sunlight creating a reflective glow on the glass. Through the window, the helipad is visible in the distance, with the faint shape of the helicopter resting uneasily. Marcus's expression is deeply troubled, brows furrowed, lips tense, as he stares out with growing concern. His posture leans slightly forward, showing the pull of his instinct. The luxurious interior contrasts with the danger looming outside. This visual reinforces Marcus's isolation. He sees what others ignore. When the helicopter blades began spinning again, the sound cut through the air with unsettling force. The uneven rhythm he had noticed earlier intensified. The ground beneath him vibrated slightly. The hairs on his arms lifted as a cold realization washed over him. A cinematic medium shot of the supervisor, a white woman in her late 40s with blonde hair tied back, glancing at Marcus with a subtle but unmistakably dismissive expression. She holds a clipboard tightly against her chest, projecting authority and impatience. Marcus stands in the foreground, posture respectful but tense, revealing the emotional impact of her condescension. The image captures workplace power imbalance in a realistic, relatable way, Marcus attempting to communicate, the supervisor already shutting him down with her body language. This wasn't normal. A dynamic wide shot of the helicopter landing with visible instability. Dust billows around the landing skids, fluttering the clothing of nearby crew members who instinctively shield their faces. The blades rotate unevenly, one side dipping lower than the other. The lake's reflection beneath the aircraft ripples with distortion. The crew members exchange tense looks, aware something feels off. This shot captures the early mechanical distress that foreshadows disaster, intensifying the suspense Marcus already feels. This wasn't safe. A medium shot of Marcus walking across the terrace with a loaded breakfast tray balanced in both hands. His uniform is spotless, his steps practiced, until the helicopter sputters again. His head snaps toward the sound, eyes widening in alarm. Plates rattle faintly on the tray, emphasizing how abruptly his focus shifts. Behind him, sunlight glows across the terrace's stone floor, but the sudden tension in Marcus's posture disrupts the tranquil scene. He is the only one reacting, highlighting his heightened awareness and building isolation. This was a warning. A tense cinematic shot of Marcus mid-stride, frozen in place. The tray tilts slightly in his hands, plates and silverware vibrating from his sudden stop. His expression is tight, eyes locked onto the helicopter with instinctual dread. The wind brushes against his apron, amplifying the sense of motion halted by fear. Around him, the resort continues undisturbed, guests chatting, workers passing by, yet Marcus stands suspended, the only one registering the danger. This visual captures the pivotal moment where concern becomes certainty. His heart pounded as the CEO approached the aircraft, completely unaware of the danger that pulsed with every rotation of the failing blades. Executives followed behind him, shielding their eyes from the wind. Security personnel stood near the perimeter, scanning the area. The pilot sat rigid in his seat, eyes flicking anxiously across the dashboard. A medium close-up of Marcus standing alone, wiping a thin line of sweat from his temple. His expression is conflicted, fear battling responsibility, instinct wrestling with social consequences. The morning sun casts warm light across his face, highlighting the tension in his eyes. His uniform remains professional, but his body language exposes how distressed he truly is. The helicopter looms blurred in the background, symbolizing the danger drawing him toward a decision he doesn't feel empowered to make. Marcus swallowed hard. A wide, dramatic long shot showing Marcus standing on the terrace, looking toward the helipad. He appears small, almost a silhouette, compared to the massive, unstable helicopter resting ominously in the distance. The visual scale emphasizes his isolation, vulnerability, and lack of authority in this environment. The wind moves his apron subtly, hinting at the pressure building around him. The serene lake and luxury architecture surrounding the scene deepen the emotional contrast, reinforcing the loneliness of being the only one who understands the danger. He couldn't stay silent. A hyper-detailed cinematic close-up of the helicopter's engine housing. The metal casing is subtly vibrating, bolts trembling under strain. Thin streaks of faint gray smoke seep from a narrow seam near the rotor mast, barely noticeable unless someone is truly listening. The rotor blades above spin with an uneven rhythm, one dipping slightly lower than the other mid-rotation, creating a visual stutter that conveys mechanical distress. Sunlight glints off the metallic surface, highlighting scratches and stress marks that suggest overlooked maintenance. The surrounding air wavers with heat distortion, adding tension. No one nearby notices except Marcus, whose instincts are being proven right with every irregular pulse. Every instinct screamed at him, move, speak, act. Even if they ignored him, even if they laughed, even if they brushed him aside, he couldn't watch danger unfold without trying to stop it, not when he could feel the outcome looming just beyond the moment. A cinematic medium shot of Marcus, stepping toward the painted restricted zone line leading to the helipad. His uniform is neat, but tension shows in the tight set of his shoulders. His jaw clenches, his brows knit together as determination and fear collide in his expression. The morning breeze lifts the edges of his apron, and sunlight casts a long shadow behind him, emphasizing the weight of his decision. In the distance, the helicopter looms like a threat ready to detonate. Despite knowing he risks reprimand, or worse, Marcus pushes forward, driven by conscience rather than authority. This shot captures that pivotal moment where fear gives way to action. He set the tray down, stepped away from the terrace, and walked toward the edge of the restricted area. His pulse raced faster with each step, not from fear of the helicopter, but from fear of what speaking up would cost him. He knew what people thought when they saw him step outside his designated lines. He knew the assumptions they made. He knew the weight of their stares. A tense, confrontational shot of Marcus approaching the boundary line, only to be met with a uniformed security guard thrusting out a rigid arm, stopping him abruptly. The guard, a tall white man with a stern jaw, looks down at Marcus with a condescending, suspicious glare. Marcus's hands lift slightly, not in surrender, but in urgency and pleading. His eyes are wide, voice caught in his throat. The background shows the helicopter looming behind them, yet the guard's attention is entirely on enforcing hierarchy, not safety. This moment visually conveys the racial and social barriers that override Marcus's attempt to prevent disaster. But he couldn't stop. A wide cinematic shot showing CEO Daniel Harrow striding confidently toward the helicopter with a group of sharply dressed executives behind him. They are mid-laughter, mouths open, hands gesturing, completely oblivious to the growing mechanical danger. Daniel's expensive navy suit reflects the sunlight, enhancing his authoritative presence. The executives walk with arrogance and ease, their designer watches and tailored clothing signaling privilege. Marcus, small and distressed in the distance, watches helplessly as the group moves closer to catastrophe. The shot captures the stark contrast between carefree power and ignored warning. His voice might not matter to them, but his conscience demanded he try. A close, tense shot inside the helicopter cockpit, showing the pilot, a middle-aged man with sweat collecting at his temples, leaning forward in alarm. His eyes are wide, scanning flickering dashboard indicators. Warning lights flash amber and red in erratic patterns. His gloved hand grips the cyclic control tightly, knuckles pale. Through the windshield, sunlight streaks across the helipad, but tension fills every frame. The pilot's posture and expression reveal that he too senses the danger, yet no one outside seems to notice. This image amplifies the urgency Marcus feels, but cannot convey. He approached the security line, raising a hand tentatively, trying to get someone's attention. His breath hitched as one of the guards turned toward him with a suspicious look, already preparing to shut him down. But in that moment, he pushed past every learned instinct to stay small, stay quiet, stay invisible. A dramatic medium shot of Marcus raising both hands slightly, an instinctive gesture conveying both fear and urgent warning. His expression is desperate yet controlled, brows furrowed hard, lips parted as he attempts to speak over the helicopter's rising roar. The wind whips his apron around his legs. His stance is forward, leaning toward the guards who refuse to let him pass. The background blurs from the force of the spinning blades, emphasizing the intensity of the moment. Marcus's posture is that of a man fighting not for himself, but to prevent tragedy. Something was wrong, and he was the only one who seemed to see it. A cinematic shot of the supervisor storming toward Marcus. She grips her clipboard tightly, her lips pressed into a thin, irritated line. Her expression radiates authority and annoyance, as though Marcus is the problem rather than the warning. She positions herself between him and the helipad with an air of condescending control. Marcus stands behind her, still anxious, trying to explain without escalating. The lighting highlights the stark contrast between their roles, her empowered dismissal versus his silenced concern. The tension is palpable. He didn't know how the next moments would unfold. He didn't know how they would respond. But he took a step forward anyway, heart pounding, knowing that whatever happened next would change the course of his life forever. A hyper-emotional close-up of Marcus's face, flushed, eyes wide with desperation. The reflection of spinning helicopter blades glimmers in his pupils, visually tying his fear directly to the danger. Sweat beads at his hairline. His jaw is tight, mouth tense but trembling slightly. The background is blurred, echoing the chaos building behind him. Through this shot, viewers feel the internal struggle. He's on the edge of breaking protocol and risking everything just to save lives that may never value his warning. He stepped forward with a tension that moved through his entire body, the kind of tension born not from fear of danger, but from fear of how the world would perceive him for trying to stop it. A wide, intense shot of the helicopter, tilting noticeably to one side, as CEO Daniel Harrow ducks beneath the rotating blades to enter. The aircraft's instability creates a visually jarring lean. The rotor wash kicks up dust and loose papers. Daniel appears unfazed, still moving with arrogant confidence. Meanwhile, the pilot inside looks panicked, gripping the controls tightly. This contrast, Daniel's dismissiveness versus the machine's visible distress, creates perfect foreshadowing. Marcus watches from afar, helpless. His breath grew shallow, his palms damp, yet something inside him refused to let him turn back. The helicopter's uneven rhythm filled the air like a warning drumbeat, pounding in his ears, vibrating through the soles of his shoes with each staggered rotation of the blades. It was getting worse, not better. Louder, not smoother. More dangerous with every passing second. A chaotic high-speed shot capturing the exact moment the helicopter's rotor clips a metal railing. A burst of bright sparks explodes outward, scattering across the platform. A fragment of metal tears loose, flying toward the edge of the terrace. The rotor blade shudders violently, warping the motion blur. Staff and executives recoil in shock. Wind from the failing rotor creates frantic turbulence in everyone's clothing. This is the split second where disaster becomes inevitable. He stood just behind the security barrier, the invisible line that separated staff from important people, the line he had spent years learning not to cross. But today, crossing it felt like the only thing he could do. A dramatic wide-angle shot of the terrace erupting into chaos. Guests stumble backward, shielding themselves from debris. Staff members duck behind pillars and tables. Papers swirl violently in the rotor wash. The helicopter wobbles dangerously at the center of the frame, fire flickering beneath it. Marcus stands frozen, horrified at seeing his warning manifest into catastrophe. The entire resort, once pristine, now looks like the beginning of a disaster zone. He lifted his hand again, hoping anyone, would catch the urgency in his expression, the seriousness in his stance. But the closest guard glanced at him with the same impatient suspicion he had seen countless times before, as if Marcus's presence near that boundary was already an intrusion. A cinematic medium shot of Marcus in a frozen half gesture, hands raised as if still trying to warn them, his face captured in pure horror. His eyes are wide, mouth slightly open, body stiff. The helicopter behind him tilts violently, flames beginning to lick the underside. Figures around him run for safety, but Marcus cannot move. This shot visually communicates the crushing emotional weight of being right but unheard. The helicopter sputtered again, wobbling slightly as the pilot gripped the controls tighter. A sharp, metallic screech echoed across the platform, barely noticeable under the roar of the rotor blades, but Marcus noticed. A sharp, high-intensity close-up of the rotor blades scraping violently against a metal railing. Sparks burst in all directions like fireworks gone wrong. Shards of metal scatter outward, illuminated by sunlight and flame. The texture of the blade shows visible damage, scrapes, burns, fractures forming in real time. This shot embodies the exact mechanical failure that triggers the full collapse. His heart clenched. A gripping cinematic shot of the helicopter lurching sideways, nose dipping suddenly. The pilot jerks the controls with desperate force, his face twisted with panic. Small flames begin erupting from underneath the aircraft, flickering dangerously close to leaking fuel. Smoke trails behind the rotors. The violent tilt sends shadows rippling across the resort walls. Fear floods the scene as disaster accelerates beyond control. The pilot's eyes widened with concern, but the executives approaching the aircraft didn't see the danger reflected in the man's expression. A slow-motion, hyper-emotional close-up of Marcus's face illuminated by reflected sparks. His eyes tremble with fear. His mouth tightens in stunned disbelief. Tiny embers float across the frame, casting flickering light on his skin. The background blurs into a chaotic haze of fire and motion. This shot visually isolates Marcus's emotional devastation, the moment he realizes catastrophe is unavoidable. They were too busy squinting against the wind, adjusting their suits, laughing off the turbulence like it was a minor inconvenience. A tense, kinetic shot of two security guards forcefully pushing Marcus backward. His arms are pinned partially as he tries to stabilize himself. His expression is hurt and fearful, not aggressive. The guards, however, interpret his urgency as disruption, not warning. Their faces show irritation and suspicion. The helicopter spirals behind them, flames spreading rapidly. This moment perfectly captures the injustice of silencing someone moments before disaster. The CEO walked ahead of them all, fully confident, fully convinced that nothing in his path could possibly go wrong. A wide shot of executives stumbling backward as the helicopter's uncontrolled spin creates violent gusts of wind. Papers tear from their clipboards and scatter across the terrace. Ties whip around their faces, hair blown into disarray. Fear replaces arrogance as the situation becomes undeniably catastrophic. The tilting helicopter dominates the frame, its rotors slicing the air dangerously close to the ground. He didn't look up at the blades spinning dangerously above him. He didn't sense the tension in the pilot's shoulders. He didn't hear the mechanical strain that Marcus heard with painful clarity. He simply strode forward, giving the world around him the same kind of dismissive authority he had shown his entire career. An explosive cinematic shot capturing the moment the first major burst of fire erupts beneath the helicopter. Flames shoot outward in a violent flash of orange and white. Smoke billows upward instantly, framing the aircraft in a fiery halo. The force of the ignition blows debris outward, lifting dust, paper, and fragments into the air. The tension transforms fully into terror as the explosion begins. Marcus knew he had seconds left before the CEO stepped inside the aircraft. Seconds before something irreversible happened. Seconds before he lost his chance. A powerful action shot of Marcus being thrown backward by the force of the explosion. His body lifts off the ground, arms flung outward, legs bent midair. Debris, metal shards, broken wood, dust clouds surround him. His face shows shock and terror. The background is engulfed in blinding fire and smoke. This visual marks the turning point where Marcus's worst fear explodes into reality, his pulse hammered in his ears. A dramatic slow-motion shot of large glass windows behind Marcus shattering from the blast's shockwave. Thousands of gleaming shards explode outward, catching firelight and sunlight as they scatter. Marcus is partially in frame, mid-fall, surrounded by shimmering fragments. The image blends beauty and destruction, symbolizing how quickly a polished world can collapse. As he leaned forward and tried to speak to the guard in front of him, the guard's arm shot out in a firm barrier, blocking his path entirely. A chaotic wide shot of guests and staff running in all directions as thick black smoke rises into the sky. People shield their faces, trip over chairs, cling to loved ones. Some scream, others freeze. The resort terrace, once pristine, now resembles a disaster zone. The helicopter burns violently behind them, flames spreading across the platform. The man's posture stiffened instantly, as if Marcus had just attempted something outrageous, something threatening. A somber, emotional shot of Marcus lying flat on the ground, one hand pressed weakly against the pavement as he struggles to lift his head. His ears ring, conveyed visually through a hazy blur around the edges of the frame. His eyes widen with shock and devastation as he stares at the burning helicopter. The flames reflect in his pupils, symbolizing the trauma and guilt forced upon him. In the distance, the wreckage groaned under the weight of collapsing metal as Marcus lay stunned, overwhelmed, and terrified. A massive cinematic wide shot capturing the helicopter fully engulfed in violent flames. Fire spills from the cockpit and engine housing, roaring in bright orange and harsh white bursts. Thick, oily black smoke spirals upward into the morning sky, darkening it with a sense of catastrophe. The once polished helipad is now covered in debris, glowing embers, and scorched marks. Twisted metal warps under the heat, collapsing inward. Flaming fragments scatter across the terrace. Emergency alarms reflect on the glass walls of the resort, amplifying the chaos. This image marks the exact moment the disaster transforms into total destruction. The explosion tore through the air with a force that seemed to crack the world open. For a moment, everything disappeared inside a blinding bloom of fire and smoke. A dramatic shot of firefighters sprinting toward the burning wreckage, their protective suits reflecting the intense orange glow of the flames. Their silhouettes appear almost heroic against the inferno, but the scale of the fire dwarfs them. The hoses are already spraying arcs of water, which vaporize instantly upon contact with the heat. Smoke rolls across the ground, swirling around their boots. Their movements are urgent, fast, and coordinated, creating a stark contrast to the stunned resort staff and terrified guests fleeing the scene. Heat surged outward in a violent wave, slamming into Marcus with a pressure that knocked the wind from his lungs. His ears filled with a high-pitched ringing, drowning out every surrounding sound, as if the blast had pulled reality into a vacuum. A powerful medium shot of Marcus on his hands and knees, trembling violently as he tries to push himself upright. Flaming debris surrounds him, chunks of metal, splintered wood, smoking shards of the helicopter. His uniform is dirtied with soot and dust, and his eyes blink rapidly as he tries to regain focus through the haze. The light from the flames outlines his figure, creating an emotional contrast between his vulnerability and the surrounding destruction. His breath is shallow, his hands shaking as he struggles to rise amid the chaos. His legs buckled beneath him, his vision washed out in white, then blurred into streaks of orange and black as the helicopter erupted again, a second burst of flame ripping through what remained of the machine. A haunting, tragic shot through billowing smoke that reveals the faint silhouette of CEO Daniel Harrow still inside the cockpit. His form is barely distinguishable, slumped, motionless, and engulfed in flames. The glass is shattered, edges glowing hot. Fire curls around the interior, consuming everything. This image is not graphic but deeply emotional, capturing the tragedy of privilege meeting consequence. The smoke obscures most details, emphasizing helplessness and the finality of the moment. He felt the impact ripple through the ground, the shockwave traveling under his feet like a tremor in the earth. A first-person POV shot mimicking Marcus's dazed perception. The edges of the frame blur into a vignette of shifting light and haze. Flames flicker in distorted shapes ahead, and distant sirens echo faintly through the muffled soundscape. Smoke drifts in slow motion across the scene. His vision wobbles slightly, as if his consciousness is struggling to stabilize. The ground appears tilted, emphasizing disorientation. This shot conveys Marcus's physical shock and emotional overwhelm in the immediate aftermath of the explosion. His knees struck the pavement as he fell, palms scraping painfully against the rough surface, but he barely noticed the sting. A wide, harrowing shot of multiple executives crawling or staggering away from the blast zone. Their tailored suits are torn, faces streaked with ash and blood. Their expressions show disbelief, terror, and confusion, so different from the arrogance they displayed minutes earlier. Some clutch injured limbs, others shield themselves from falling debris. The contrast between their earlier confidence and current vulnerability is deeply cinematic. Smoke and fire cast chaotic shadows across the scene, amplifying the devastation. The world around him was chaos, fragmented into flashes of movement and bursts of light. Debris flew in every direction, sharp fragments of metal spinning like shrapnel through the air. A mid-distance portrait of Marcus standing slowly amid swirling smoke, his face illuminated by the flickering flames. He looks devastated, eyes wide, lips trembling, posture slack with emotional weight. Soot stains his uniform. His gaze is fixed on the burning wreckage, reflecting both horror and profound heartbreak. Flames roar behind him, casting long shifting shadows across his figure. This shot conveys a man witnessing a nightmare he tried desperately to prevent. A piece of paneling crashed onto the terrace behind him with a deafening clang. Another chunk of rotor blade sliced through a nearby table, splintering the wood into flying shards. A chilling cinematic shot of guests and executives glaring at Marcus from a distance. Some point, others whisper to each other with narrowed eyes. Their expressions drip with fear, panic, and instinctive blame. Marcus stands in the foreground, stunned and confused, his face reflecting disbelief at the sudden shift of attention. Smoke fills the air, partially obscuring the twisted wreckage behind them. Even amidst disaster, prejudice rises instantly, and the image captures that injustice. Marcus lifted his head in disbelief, his mind fighting to catch up with what was happening. A dramatic medium close-up of the supervisor storming toward Marcus, her expression twisted with a mix of panic, accusation, and fear-driven certainty. Her eyes are sharp, lips tight, shoulders squared as if confronting a threat. She clutches her clipboard like a shield. Marcus looks back at her with shock and hurt, realizing she has no intention of asking if he is okay, only of controlling the narrative. The background flames cast an eerie orange glow on both of them. People were screaming, though he could only see their mouths moving through the haze. A symbolic, atmospheric shot showing Marcus's dark silhouette cast onto thick clouds of smoke rising from the wreckage. In the background, guests and staff physically recoil, stepping away from him as if his presence is dangerous. Their faces show distrust, fear, and judgment. The stark contrast between his shadow and their cold reactions visually embodies the racism and scapegoating tightening around him. Marcus appears isolated, swallowed by a world that refuses to see truth. Some ducked behind pillars, others sprinted toward the building. A few collapsed, overwhelmed by the shock. A moving cinematic shot where paramedics and firefighters rush around Marcus, carrying stretchers, shouting orders, spraying water onto flames, yet none of them acknowledge him. Motion blur emphasizes their speed while Marcus stands in the center, unmoving, as if time has slowed for him alone. His expression is hollow, his posture deflated. This image captures the emotional isolation of someone who saved no one, but is being blamed by everyone. The once pristine helipad was now engulfed in swirling fire and black smoke, the wreckage of the helicopter twisted into mangled metal that glowed with burning heat. A deeply emotional, tight close-up of Marcus's face as the crushing realization settles in. They are blaming him. His eyes glisten with tears he refuses to shed. His brows tremble, jaw clenched, and a subtle quiver runs through his lips. Soot and ash cling to his skin. The burning wreckage behind him creates a blurred inferno of orange and black, framing his expression with tragedy. This image shows the exact moment when fear becomes trauma, and trauma becomes injustice. The air stank of fuel, ash, and scorched earth. Thick clouds rolled upward, spreading into the sky like a dark stain that erased the sun. A somber, cinematic medium shot of Marcus sitting, hunched on the curb near the staff entrance. His elbows rest on his knees, and his hands cover his face in exhaustion and despair. Smoke from the helicopter wreckage drifts in the background, softening the light and creating an eerie haze. His waiter uniform is stained with dust, ash, and sweat. The cold concrete beneath him and the dim lighting emphasize loneliness and emotional collapse. The world around him moves frantically, but Marcus appears frozen, overwhelmed, ignored, and silently breaking under the weight of trauma and blame. Smoke curled through the air like a living thing, twisting upward into a sky that had dimmed under the weight of the disaster. The flames had begun to settle, but the wreckage still crackled with heat, sending small bursts of embers drifting across the helipad. Emergency crews swarmed the scene, their coordinated movements carving order into the chaos. Yet even as medics lifted the injured onto stretchers, even as firefighters sprayed down the remaining fire, even as staff scrambled to regain control, Marcus felt as though he stood in the eye of a storm that refused to pass. A poignant shot capturing a medic kneeling beside Marcus, gently checking his vitals, 2 fingers at his wrist, a flashlight briefly illuminating his eyes. Her expression is compassionate and professional. But behind her, several staff members and guests stand at a distance, watching Marcus with masked suspicion and discomfort. Their body language, crossed arms, stiff postures, narrowed eyes, reveals judgment, not empathy. The contrast between the medic's kindness and the crowd's mistrust highlights the racial bias intensifying around him. Smoke and flashing emergency lights create a tense, cinematic backdrop. The world around him moved with frantic urgency, but he was frozen in place, his mind replaying the moments leading up to the explosion with painful clarity. The sputtering engine, the wobbling blades, the instinct that had clawed at him, the desperate attempt to step forward, and the wall of dismissal that had stopped him cold. Everything he feared had played out exactly as he sensed it would, and yet, instead of recognition, instead of acknowledgement, what he now saw in the eyes of others was an accusation he had never earned. A dramatic wide shot showing investigators in reflective vests gathering around the smoldering wreckage, taking notes on clipboards, pointing to twisted metal, and snapping photographs. Their faces are serious, focused, methodical. In the far distance, almost out of frame, Marcus stands alone, watching anxiously. His posture is tense, and the separation between him and the investigators underscores his fear that their findings might be distorted by others' assumptions. Smoke rises between them, visually symbolizing the cloud of uncertainty and prejudice looming over Marcus. It began with whispers, soft at first, barely audible beneath the sirens and the crackling wreckage. But whispers gathered momentum, growing into murmurs, then into sharp glances cast in his direction. A few staff members avoided looking at him altogether, moving around him with rigid discomfort. Others stared too long, their eyes full of questions shaped not by truth but by fear, fear that needed someone to blame. A symbolic medium shot of Marcus returning to work. He walks slowly through the resort's polished hallway floors that reflect bright artificial lighting. His steps are heavier, his shoulders slightly slouched, and his face carries a quiet exhaustion. Staff members he once spoke to easily now avoid his gaze. The pristine environment, marble floors, gold accents, spotless walls, contrasts sharply with the emotional burden he carries. Each step highlights resilience mixed with sadness as he resumes duties in a place that no longer feels safe. He tried to breathe deeply, but his chest tightened with each inhale. His hands trembled uncontrollably, whether from shock or the weight of the unspoken blame settling over him, he couldn't tell. A realistic scene of Marcus serving tables in the dining hall, balancing plates with practiced precision. 2 guests nearby whisper to each other while glancing at him, their faces tense and judgmental. Others shift uncomfortably in their seats or lower their voices when he passes. Marcus's expression is stoic but wounded, his eyes downcast, his movements slower than usual. The warm lighting and luxurious decor contrast sharply with the coldness directed at him. This moment captures how stigma and quiet prejudice distort everyday interactions. The supervisor's approach only intensified the sensation. She came toward him with urgency, her footsteps quick but unsteady, her face pale and drawn. There was no empathy in her expression, only panic and a harsh kind of self-preservation. A somber nighttime shot of Marcus walking home along a quiet street. Faint yellow streetlights cast soft pools of light along the pavement. He walks with slow, heavy steps, his hands buried in his pockets, shoulders hunched. His uniform is slightly wrinkled after a long shift. The darkness around him mirrors his emotional fatigue, while the shadows stretching behind him symbolize the weight of what he carries. It is a moment of solitude, vulnerability, and painful introspection. Her presence made the air around him feel darker. She gestured sharply at him, motioning for him to step aside, not to rest, not to recover, but to remove himself from view. A peaceful yet emotional shot of Marcus standing at the lake's edge during twilight. The sky reflects soft hues of blue and purple on the still water. Marcus looks out across the lake, his posture upright but contemplative. The wind gently ruffles his hair and clothing. His expression is tired but evolving, hurt giving way to resolve. This serene moment contrasts the chaos he survived, symbolizing healing, understanding, and the first flicker of strength returning after trauma. The natural beauty around him offers quiet space for reflection. Marcus sat on the curb outside the staff building, the same place he'd stepped into hundreds of times before, but now it felt impossibly foreign. He wrapped his arms around himself, trying to steady the trembling that rippled through his muscles. The taste of smoke still clung to the back of his throat. A striking, symbolic portrait of Marcus standing under the night sky. He faces the camera directly, eyes steady, posture firm, expression filled with quiet determination. Soft moonlight illuminates his features, highlighting the strength he has rebuilt through suffering. The background is dark but peaceful, representing a world that tried to silence him but failed. This final shot conveys truth, resilience, and the refusal to remain unheard. It visually closes the narrative with empowerment rather than despair. How many more lives must be shattered before the world finally listens, not to status, not to power, but to truth?